Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekhachari, Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. I coordinate the paper on sociology in India. Today we are going to discuss the module Gender Debate in India. This module has been written by V. Abhinaya, Research Scholar, Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. In this module, we are going to discuss the whole concept of gender, especially the manner in which feminist movement in India has conceptualized gender and its relationship with caste, class and ethnicity and sexuality. It is also important to understand that this module has also addressed the campaigns and issues of women's movement in India. Objective: this module seeks to introduce some basic concepts and theories related to India and familiarize readers with the multiple ways in which gender intersects with other social systems in India. Gender is present everywhere, although its presence remains largely unnoticed. Gender roles are internalized to such an extent that their apparent normality or naturalness is unquestioningly assumed to be true. As a result, many gendered processes in the social order are viewed as natural rather than oppressive. The increasing violence against women and the unequal occupational status of women and the underrepresentation of women in the political sphere, all these are reflective of a gender-biased society. In the Indian context, the question of gender is further complicated by the presence of other systems of stratification and differentiation such as caste, class, tribe and religion. To analyze the nature of gender inequality, it is inevitable to examine the nature of patriarchy or the systematic domination of women by men. However, can gender be simply attributed to a patriarchal system? In a highly plural with a multiple division based on religion, ethnicity, caste and class, how is patriarchy to be viewed? Is this experience of gender oppression the same within all these systems or do they differ? Does patriarchy function as a single system of oppression or are there multiple patriarchies at work which govern women from different structures in different ways? This module is divided into 3 sections. The first section will introduce some of the basic concepts associated with gender, including the distinction between sex and gender, patriarchy, gender roles, masculinity and femininity. The second section examines the various strands of feminist theory which through the use of these concepts have come to challenge gender oppression in its various spheres. The final section will examine how Indian feminist scholars have used these theoretical concepts to analyze the complexities of gender and its intersections with multiple social systems such as caste and class, sex and gender. According to Anne Oakley, the term sex generally refers to the biological characteristics by which human beings are characterized as male or female. Gender refers to the social and socio-psychological attributes by which human beings are characterized as masculine or feminine. However, in recent years, this view of seeing sex as strictly biological, determined and gender as culturally learned has been criticized by queer theorists such as Judith Butler, who argue instead that we should view both sex and gender as socially constructed products. Not only is gender a purely social construction that lacks a fixed essence, but the human body itself is subject to social forces which shape and alter it in various ways. Individuals may often choose to construct and reconstruct their bodies as they please, ranging from exercise to dieting to plastic surgeries and sex change operations. Gender roles and socialization. From the moment a child is born, when the sex of the child is ascertained, the process of gender socialization begins. The girl child is dressed in pink and the boy child in blue. Barbie dolls are gifted to the girls while toy guns are reserved for the boys. Girls are taught to cook and the boys to drive vehicles. The list is endless. As the child grows up, the ideas about the male traits and female traits are grasped and imbibed through various agencies of socialization. The important ones being the immediate family, school, peer group and media. Notions of femininity and masculinity become central to the ways in which they form their identities. Girl learns that her top priorities are to get married and rear children, while the boy learns from a young age that the responsibility of fending for the family will fall upon him and thus makes his decision about education and career with this in mind. The girl learns that the preferred feminine traits are those of beauty, patience, obedience, chastity and a generally passive demeanor. The boy learns that the preferred macho behavior includes aggression, power, unrestrained sexual behavior and a general demeanor of assertiveness. Thus the roles they play are usually in regard to these expected norms of behavior. In other words, a gender role refers to the social expectations arising from the conceptions surrounding gender and the behavioral expressions of these, including forms of speech, mannerisms, conduct and gesture. Gender roles are predominantly considered within a family context as well as within a society in general and may collectively be referred to as gender stereotypes. Gender stereotypes represent society's collective knowledge of customs, myth, ideas, religion and art, and it is from this framework of knowledge that they form beliefs beliefs about individuals and groups. Feminism. Feminist theory is a generalized, wide-ranging system of ideas that seek to challenge the traditional conceptions of femininity and gender. Theorizing about gender as much does not require a feminist perspective. While many 19th and 20th century founding fathers of sociology had something to say about gender, most of it can hardly be called feminist. In order to be considered a feminist theory, in addition to or instead of focus on gender as difference, a theory must recognize gender as a system of inequality, assume that it is a changeable rather than necessary feature of human society, and full-heartedly advocate a commitment to a gender equitable system. Feminist theories in relation to gender inequality contrast markedly with one another. They each seek to explain this inequality through a wide range of social processes which include sexism, patriarchy and capitalism. While the distinction between various strands of feminism have never been defined, this distinction is important as the political demands made by each strand vary to a quite an extent. Liberal feminism. Liberal feminism holds the view that if society is to achieve gender equality, then it must provide women with the same political rights and economic opportunities as well as the same education that men can enjoy. Two important proponents of this doctrine, John Stuart Mill and Harriet Taylor, argued that society's double standards hurt women. They believed that the intellectual difference between men and women was a result of men's higher social position and education. While Taylor did not contest predominant assumption of male and female roles in society, she pushed women to earn income outside the home. She advised women to hire servants to do all the housework. Taylor's argument pushed women's entrance into the public sphere. Paradoxically, Mill argued that despite education, women would choose child and family over career. Liberal feminists argued for the formation of society in which each individual can act free and responsible agent and be able to live the life that is most suitable for him or her. Liberal feminism's emphasis on freedom of choice and equality between sexes while pushing for change is more reformist in its agenda than revolutionary, as it does not question the basic roots of inequality and challenge the present sex-gender system itself. Radical feminism. The basic argument of radical feminism is that men are responsible for and benefit from the exploitation of women. The analysis of patriarchy, the systemic domination of women by men, is of central concern to this branch of feminism. Patriarchy is perceived to be a universal phenomenon that has existed transhistorically and transculturally. The basis of radical feminism is their analysis of the interlinkages between sex and power. While sex has been discussed either overtly or covertly, it was not until radical feminism's outrageous declaration that the personal is political that women's sexuality became the subject of much political analysis. The main tenets of radical feminism can be stated thus: that women were historically the first oppressed group, that women's oppression is most widespread, existing nearly in every society, that women's oppression is the deepest and hardest form of oppression to eradicate and cannot be removed by other social changes such as abolition of class society. Unlike the liberal feminists, radical feminists demanded an overthrow of the system of patriarchy rather than demanding reformatory changes within the system. They believe that this can happen through a basic consciousness raising among women, which will lead to each woman recognizing her own value and strength, thereby rejecting patriarchal ideals of womanhood, submissive, dependent, chaste, and instead establish ties with other women, strengthening sisterhood of trust, support, appreciation. Once such a sisterhood is established, it would make it easier for women to confront any aspect of patriarchy that they come across. Furthermore, they encourage a level of separatism, with women withdrawing into women-run businesses, households, communities, and so on. Marxist socialist feminism. The argument made by classical Marxist feminists is that the unequal class structure is the basis of women's oppression rather than sexism per se. They claim that in order to understand women's oppression, one needs to analyze the links between women's work status and the woman's self-image. When the initial site of production was the family, women were in control of their lives. However, when there was a shift in the site of production to private property and inheritance, power shifted from the hands of the women to men. Contemporary Marxist feminists also focus on women's work-related concerns. Central to the analysis is the way in which women's institution of family is connected to capitalism. Since the emergence of industrialization and the capitalist mode of production, the notion of productive work, paid labor, is regarded as much more important than unproductive work, unpaid domestic labor. Women's work was trivialized as not real work and was thus given very low salaries and low status on job hierarchies. Socialist feminism developed due to the dissatisfaction with gender-blind character of Marxist thought. Socialist feminists argue that although Marxist feminists explained how capitalism caused the separation of the workplace from homestead, they failed to explain why capitalism assigned women to the homestead and men to the workplace. They emphasized on the need to analyze how capitalism interacts with patriarchy to oppress women. According to Alison Jagger, capitalism oppresses women as workers, but patriarchy oppresses women as women. In this way, oppression affects both her activity and her identity. She theorized that women were constantly constantly alienated in ways that men were not. According to her, women faced alienation in three broad spheres: sexuality, motherhood, and intellectuality. In the first, she becomes alienated from herself, that is, her body is merely an object for the men to behold and enjoy. Jagar also suggested that motherhood can be an alienating experience for women, especially because more often than not, questions regarding when to have a child, how many children to have, how to raise them, and so on are not decided by the women themselves but by the family and the larger societal pressures. Finally, Jagar explains how women are alienated in the intellectual sphere as well. Women are constantly made to feel unsure of themselves, unworthy of expressing their opinions and ideas in public because the place they are told it is in the domestic sphere. It is due to this fact that it is men and not women who have set the thought and the discourse. Postmodern feminism. Postmodernist feminism incorporates ideas from two distinct sets of perspectives: postmodernism and feminism. Postmodern feminists reject Enlightenment notions, especially universalism, human nature, and socio-political progress, and build their argument by problematizing the very notion of woman. They argue that there is no single female nature or any more than there is a single unitary nature throughout human history and across human history. They also critique the exaggerated claims of modernist scholars on issues of objectivity and generalizability. Instead, they offer techniques such as deconstruction, decentering, and a focus on difference and multiplicity of truth rather than the unitary notion of truth which erases out marginal identity. Drawing heavily from Foucault's work on knowledge and power, Butler suggests that there is a need to deconstruct what we know to be truth about gender and see it for the social construction that it really is. Black feminism. Black feminism grew out of the dissatisfaction arising out of the commonly held view that women over the world share a common universal experience of oppression. Those who proposed this idea were generally middle class, urban, white feminists writing about the problems of women as a homogeneous universal category. They began writing and theorizing about women's experience of subordination by patriarchy from their own subjective experience. But this essentialism of oppression as a universal category, which these feminists imposed on all women across the world, itself was problematic. They largely ignored the different and the layered subjective experiences of oppression by different women in terms of race, class, religion, region, and ethnicity. Black feminists argue that while all women potentially experience oppression on the basis of gender, women are, however, differentially oppressed by the varied intersections of other social arrangements such as race, sexuality, class. For instance, critical race theorist Kimberly Crenshaw argues that black women's oppression should be understood not solely by the categories of racism or sexism, but as a combination of both racism and sexism. In a similar vein, Angela Davis cites the case of Joan Ann Little to argue that rape and sexual assault on black women need to be located in the larger socio-historical context of slavery, racism, and sexism. She points out that sexual violence against black women should be conceptualized as a site of intersecting oppression. Bell Hooks argues that while white feminists like Susan Brown Miller do write about sexual exploitation and violation of black women, they treat it merely as a result of the ongoing socio-historical context of slavery. They neglect the fact that it led to the devaluation of black women even in the post-slavery America, and that sexism and racism act hand in hand in the sexual exploitation of black women. Due to white women's racism and black men's sexism, black feminists emphasize on the need for a fresh feminist perspective which takes into consideration the experiences of black women. The term black feminism disturbs the racism inherent in advancing feminism as for whites-only ideology and movement. Inserting the adjective black challenges the assumed whiteness of feminism and fractures the false universalism of this term for both white and black women. Dalit feminism. The women's movement in India initially concerned itself with tackling violence against women, but the focus was on the ways violence affected the lives of middle class, upper caste women, because most of the early Indian feminists came from this section of society. These early feminists ignored the intersections of caste and religion and prioritized the identity of women above other categories. As in the Western feminist movement, which largely ignored the issue of race and thereby left out black women from the movement, the early Indian women's movement, by ignoring the intersections of caste and class, neglected the majority of Dalit women whose experience of oppression differed vastly from those of the upper caste women. For example, because of the caste background, Dalit women were oppressed by men and upper caste women. In debates about caste and patriarchies, all Dalits came to be assumed as male and all women as Savarna. Rege aptly phrased this phenomenon as a masculinization of Dalithood and Sarvanization of womanhood. According to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the champion of the Dalit movement in India, as long as the caste system remains, women will continue continue to be subordinated, as the system of caste is inextricably linked to gender oppression. He sees an organic link between the struggle against the caste system and struggle for the liberation of women, argues Pardeshi. Thus, the Dalit feminist movement is a struggle for the annihilation of caste system as much as it is a struggle for the annihilation of the patriarchal system. Gender in Indian society. This section specifically looks at how gender plays a role in different social institutions in India, namely the caste system, the family, occupational setting, and finally the state. These institutions were chosen to demonstrate the wide range of institutions that both shape and are shaped by the category of gender. It ends with a brief note on the women's movement in India and how it contributed to improving conditions of gender relations in various spheres of social life. In India, gender has to be located and understood within a caste-class framework. Uma Chakravarti contends that class, caste, and gender are systems which are linked together. The caste system, which is a traditional system of stratification in Indian society and based on the notions of purity and pollution. It functions on the premise that it is through women that caste purity is ensured and maintained, and therefore women's sexuality is strictly controlled and regulated through the institution of marriage. Women were the crucial elements for maintaining the boundaries of these close groups. Chakravarti describes this interlinkage of caste and gender as Brahmanical patriarchy, wherein patriarchal codes govern the caste system, which shapes and in turn shaped by the gender practices. The sets of codes for women differ according to the status of the caste group in the hierarchy of caste, although all women were controlled with the most stringent control over their sexuality. The safeguarding of caste structure is achieved through the highly restricted movement of women. Chakravarti argues women are regarded as gateways, literally points of entrance into the caste system. The purity of women is also essential for maintaining the purity of the caste group, and therefore women's sexuality is strictly channelized into acceptable institutions of marriage and motherhood, wherein both caste purity is maintained and patrilineal succession is ensured. If these traditional breakdown and misogyny, that is mixing of caste, takes place, the Brahmanical texts view this to be the Kali Yuga, a period of great moral degradation characterized by broken families, corrupt women, and mixing of caste. To prevent this from occurring, women's subordination was institutionalized in a varieties of ways. On the one hand, coercion was exercised by the family, state, and religious authorities. On the other hand, an ideology of consent was propagated, where ideals such as the chaste wife were propagated to attain women's compliance to the system. Prem Chaudhary, through her analysis of enforced caste and kinship codes as they played out during the marriage arrangements in rural North India, demonstrates a clear continuity of structural norms present today with the ancient structures described by Chakravarti. She links the increasing violent nature of punishments by caste panchayat to those who break these norms with increasing urbanization and consumerism. Gita locates caste as central to the conceptualization of gender in India, and Rege discusses the shortcomings of understanding caste and women in binary terms. Although all women experience gender-based discrimination, the form and nature of their oppression differs widely based on their caste location. The debate over the women's reservation bill clearly problematizes the posing of women and caste in binary terms. Gender and family. The family has been typically regarded as an institution central to women's life and a site of production and gender inequality. Several schools of thought have analyzed gender relations within the family in different ways. The functionalist approach views the family as essential for the stability of society by socializing children and stabilizing adult personalities. According to Talcott Parsons, the man played the instrumental role while the wife played the expressive role. He believed that it is essential to keep these roles separate to ensure the stability of occupational structure and of kinship organization. According to feminist approaches, the institution of family is directly responsible for the subordination of women due to unequal power relations stemming from the sexual division of labor, coupled with the emphasis on motherhood as a single priority in women's life. The Marxist feminist approach argued that women's relegation to the domestic sphere is essential for the capitalist system to prosper, as creation of surplus value would not be possible were it not for women taking care of the household and rearing the children. In Indian society, the socio-cultural importance of institutions of marriage and family cannot be overemphasized. Often viewed as the marker of a stable and traditional society, falling apart of a family is immediately juxtaposed to modern society with no value system. In recent years, feminists have seriously challenged the imagination of family as a safe place for women by calling out the highly unequal power dynamics within the family. In a patriarchal system which unquestioningly places men in positions of authority, the women in the household often have to battle for some amount of power which is gained with respect to their positions with men. Thus is a classic example of mother-in-law daughter-in-law conflicts where they both attempt to gain the approval of their son or husband relatively in order to gain a certain advantage over the other. Because of the strong preference for the male child child in the society, women with son carry a higher status in the family hierarchy than women with daughters. While there has been lot sociological inquiry into the family as constituted by husband, wife and children with rules of behavior, role allocations, the term households are often used interchangeably, is mostly used in economic and statistical analysis. By using household as a unit of analysis, Jain and Banerjee explain how economic relations also play an important role within the private sphere and reveal how the household essentially is a microcosm of larger society in terms of unequal distribution of economic power, benefits related to access to resources, capital and gender. Women and work. Three main questions are asked when understanding the gendered processes of work. Why do women engage in paid work less than men do? Why do women get paid less? Why do women engage in different jobs than men? Several schools of thought approach these questions differently. The functionist analysis of work attribute the lesser number of women entering into the labor force to their primary position within the family. As they are viewed primarily as caretakers of children and the elderly, they are expected to stay within the confines of the household and take care of the domestic work. Here the notions of productive work, that is paid labor, and unproductive work, unpaid domestic labor, must be looked at critically and challenged. There is a need to recognize that language is an important component of ideological structures. The notion has led to the process of devaluation of women's work within the household, which includes cooking, cleaning, nurturing and child rearing. To further complicate this notion of domestic labor, Kumkum Sangari suggests that unpaid domestic labor is performed within the framework of lasting personal relationships which are not and cannot be measured in terms of time and money. A liberal approach towards understanding gender inequality in the workplace seeks to analyze the cultural and microstructural features of corporations and describes how the management ethic is very masculine in nature and how different slots in the job hierarchy have gender-specific meanings attached to them which are most often unfavorable towards women. This phenomenon has come to be called as a glass ceiling. The Federal Glass Ceiling Commission 1995 defined glass ceiling as artificial barriers to the advancement of women and minorities. These barriers reflect discrimination, a deep line of demarcation between those who prosper and those left behind. In these words, the term glass ceiling refers to the phenomenon wherein gender or other disadvantages are stronger at the top of the professional hierarchy than at the lower level. It is a distinctively gendered, racial and caste phenomenon. It reflects a job inequality which is unexplained by the person's past qualification or achievements. As a result of this, women are concentrated in lower earning industries and organizations and lack representation in managerial and executive positions. Since the glass ceiling phenomena is not overt but subtle, it is a challenge to address it through legislation. However, one still needs formal laws to ensure equal opportunities for both women and men. While the glass ceiling is in reference to the organized sector, women working in the unorganized sector face a different set of problems. To begin with, difference between these two sectors is stark. The organized sector is characterized by relatively stable and safe employment, incremental wages that can meet minimum standards of living, and access to basic services and welfare measures. The informal sector, on the other hand, is characterized by workforce that has little formal training and is often illiterate. Secondly, this force has no source of income apart from earnings of their own labor. Coupled with this is the extremely low wages they receive for their laborious efforts, which renders it necessary for them to use all possible members of the family to add to the income, including women and children. Lastly, due to the low wages and abysmal work conditions, informal sector labor has very low status in society. In India, this low status is particularly pronounced due to the fact that the majority of these workers belong to the backward or Dalit caste. The caste system, which is based on notions of purity and pollution, is at work here, where labor often involves strenuous work which goes with the sweat, filth and other such bodily features which are markers of inferiority and subordination in Indian society. The phrase feminization of labor is being used to suggest that there are increasing number of women today who are replacing men in traditionally male-dominated areas. Nirmala Banerjee challenges this thesis in the context of India and urges a more nuanced understanding of women's initial position in relation to the possible entry to the labor markets. An important feature of informal sector is the majority of workers are women and children. They continue to face discrimination and marginalization, both subtle and blatant, and do not share the fruits of development equally. Ignorance, traditional bound attitudes, illiteracy, seasonal nature of employment, heavy physical work of different types, lack of comprehensive legislation to cover these workers in informal sector, and competition in employment result in deprival of appropriate wages. Wages in the unorganized sector are arbitrarily fixed, often without regard to minimum wage registrations, which adversely affect the income of wage workers in general and women workers in particular. In Indian context, the the intersection of caste, class, and gender put these women at a very vulnerable position at risk of physical and sexual violence every day. Gender and state. What is then the relationship between gender and state in India? According to Nivedita Menon, two distinctive trajectories have been made by the term gender in India. The first one develops from the politics of caste and sexuality and seeks to destabilize the prevalent gender norms of society. The second trajectory is linked to the state through its policies involving gender and development, wherein the concept of gender is domesticated and come to be understood as a synonym for women. Before independence, the state attempts to amend gender-based discrimination in society involved legislation through the colonial government towards banning sati, dowry, raising the age of marriage, etc. Post-independence, gender issues were for most part neglected in the face of larger issues such as development and nation building. However, in the 1970s, owing to the growing presence of the women's movement and series of landmark events, which included the report towards equality by the Committee on the Status of Women, which highlighted the deplorable extent of existing gender inequality, the International Decade of Women, and the report Shrama Shakti, the state was pressurized into acting for betterment of the marginalized section. Consequently, the Government of India set up the Ministry of Human Resource Development, which included Department of Women and Child Development in it. Through them, the state began schemes and programs directed towards teaching, training of skills to women in various sectors. Another important state intervention was the introduction of microcredit programs to the poor women in informal sector of the economy and promotion of self-help groups. By equating gender with women, the state has mainstreamed gender, making it just another component of the development project. Rather than challenge traditional conceptions of gender and gender stereotypes, the state's narrow approach towards gender has reinforced traditional norms. Thus, the belief that women are responsible with money leads to gender-linked microcredit schemes. The stereotype that tribal women are good at handling natural resources makes them beneficiaries of joint forest management programs. While these interventions do make superficial changes in the lives of the women, it does not change the roots of inequality which stem from sexual division of labor. Another area of contention between the state and gender is over the question of population control and national demographic. The steeply declining sex ratio has ensured that lot of attention has been given towards women and prevailing conditions of gender inequality. However, the attention is not on the quality of lives of these women but on the reproductive health of these women, stemming from a concern over the stability of the patriarchal family and the larger nation as a whole. Thus, one of the schemes announced by the government in 2007 was the opening of centers where people can abandon unwanted daughters instead of aborting them, clearly revealing their interest in preventing female feticide is solely to combat a sex ratio that could be detrimental to nation stability. Bina Agarwal contends that assumption that women are or should be primarily housewives, mothers, secondary earners permeates most policies of the modern state and is reflected in its justification of a discriminatory wage structure, a double burden of work and disparity in access to resources. She points out that an analysis of the gender ideology perpetuated by the state reveals its singular preoccupation with two particular aspects, the domestication of women and the control over the female sexuality. In addition to this, the increasingly neoliberal mode of governance finds itself caught between offering political, economic and cultural rights to women as citizens of the nation and between maintaining the traditional structure of the family and community. An inevitable gap therefore exists between the liberal state commitment to gender equality on one hand and to the patriarchal family, male property rights and free market on the other. Women's movement in India. During the colonial rule and freedom struggle, there was an outstanding number of women who participated in the nationalist movement and through it created awareness about their individual rights. However, different streams of thought within this movement had varying, often contentious images of identities for women. After gaining independence, the Indian Constitution assured political, economic and cultural rights for women, argue Agnihotri and Mazumdar. Ironically, there soon developed a conflict between these new rights and the traditional value system of long-standing patriarchal social order. Due to the inferior position of women in such an order and the state's newfound emphasis on the development project, women gradually started fading away from the political scenario. This led to the disintegration of women's movement and fading of women's question from the public sphere. However, this movement was revived in the 1970s owing to the socio-political climate of that period, which included the crisis of the state and government in the 1970s, resulting in the emergency. In addition to this, post-emergency upsurge in favor of civil rights and burgeoning women's organizations in the early 80s also created conditions for the revival of women's movement in India. One of the first issues that women's movement looked into was gender violence. The cry against the increasing incidence of violence against women became the rallying point for the movement. They scrutinized the structural violence in the society which was perpetuated by institutions of the state, community, family and society at large. Although their work has made significant changes in both legislation and in creating awareness about gender inequality, there is still a long way to go. The movement has been subject to several internal conflicts centering upon what the women's issues are and how they should be dealt with. The debates over Uniform Civil Code and the proposed reservation of women for seats in legislative bodies have been significant in that they mark deep fissures within the women's movement. Feminists stand on these issues very widely along caste, class, community lines. Decentralized structure of the movement has been both its strength and its weakness. Earlier problems such as gendered violence and misogynistic ideologies continue to persist across society in addition to newer challenges such as increasingly neoliberal state with its repressive ideology. The women's movement thus need to rise up to these challenges and continue the struggle for a gender equitable society. Conclusion. The above discussion begins with emphasizing the socially constructed nature of gender and the multiple aspects in which it plays an integral part of our lives. It goes on to explain the various ways in which it acts as a system of inequality, with the male gender subordinating the female gender, and describes the various strands of feminist theories that challenge gender oppression. In the subsequent section, it describes how gender relations interact with different social institutions in India. First, it explains how caste hierarchy is closely related to gender oppression and the two intersect along the lines of what came to be known as Brahmanical patriarchy. It then discusses how family is a site of production of gender inequality, further discusses gender inequalities in workplace in terms of differential salaries and occupations, and also the issue of glass ceiling. Then the discussion moves to the relationship between Indian state and gender and how it is caught between a contradictory position of commitment to gender equality and a commitment to patriarchal family, free market and male property rights on the other. It ends with a description of women's movement in India, the ways in which it has challenged and intervened in the process of gender inequality within the nation and the challenge it faces in the days to come. At the end of the module Gender Debate in India, we have discussed initially the different various theoretical standpoints that frame the gender discourse to understand the gender inequalities in the society, and then gave a detailed understanding about how gender issues is being theorized, conceptualized and analyzed within the Indian context. We have also understood the little detail in terms of the various relationship of gender with caste, class, especially in terms of caste and in relation to Dalit feminism too. We have also critically analyzed the growth of women's movement in India and have also explained the issues that it took up in terms of its campaigns and policies. Thank you.